the shadow president, Venezuela, drugs, and the war that never came. In the early hours of the morning in Caracas, long before the city wakes, military convoys move quietly through streets once filled with music and laughter. The uniforms are pressed, the weapons polished, the insignias shining under streetlights. To the outside world, they represent sovereignty and order. But for years, intelligence agencies across the world have claimed something else was moving through those same corridors of power: money, cocaine, and silence. At the center of it all stands one man, Nicolás Maduro. This is not the story of a sudden scandal. It is the story of decades, of revolution, ideology, geopolitics, and a country slowly transformed into what U.S. prosecutors would later describe as a narco-state operating in plain sight. Nicolás Maduro Moros was born on November 23, 1962, in Caracas, Venezuela. He did not come from privilege. He did not come from the military elite. In his early adulthood, he worked as a bus driver for the Caracas metro system, where he became active in left-wing labor movements. It was there that he was introduced to revolutionary ideology, union politics, and eventually the inner circle of a rising political force led by Hugo Chavez. Chavez, a former army officer who had attempted a failed coup in 1992, became president in 1999, riding a wave of populist anger against corruption and inequality. His Bolivarian revolution promised dignity for the poor and independence from U.S. influence. Maduro became one of Chavez's most loyal followers, serving as a union leader, then a member of parliament, then foreign minister. By 2012, Chavez was dying of cancer. Behind the scenes, the question was not if power would change hands, but to whom. Chavez publicly named Maduro as his successor, calling him a son of the revolution. When Chavez died on March 5, 2013, Venezuela entered a new era. Maduro narrowly won the presidential election a month later, amid allegations of irregularities and protests. From the very beginning, his rule was fragile. Oil prices were high at first, but the foundations of the economy were already cracking. Inflation surged. Food shortages began. Crime exploded. And according to U.S. intelligence assessments, something else was expanding quietly in parallel. Long before Maduro became president, American and Colombian investigators had already been tracking drug routes passing through Venezuela. By the early 2000s, Colombia's cocaine production was booming, and traffickers needed reliable corridors to move drugs north. Venezuela, with its long Caribbean coastline, weak institutions, and growing hostility toward U.S. oversight, became increasingly attractive. By 2005, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration had severed formal cooperation with Venezuela, accusing the government of obstructing anti-drug operations. From that moment, Venezuela became, in the words of several U.S. officials, a black hole for narcotics monitoring. It was during this period that investigators began using the term Cartel de los Soles, the cartel of the suns. The name referred to the sun insignia worn by Venezuelan generals. According to U.S. allegations, this was not a traditional cartel with a single kingpin, but a network of military officers, intelligence officials, and political figures who allegedly facilitated drug shipments in exchange for protection and profit. When Maduro took office in 2013, he inherited not just the presidency, but this entire ecosystem. From 2013 to 2016, Venezuela's economy collapsed at historic speed. Oil prices fell sharply. The bolivar became nearly worthless. Millions fled the country. Amid the chaos, the military gained extraordinary power, controlling food distribution, ports, airports, and fuel supply. U.S. prosecutors would later argue that this militarization was not just about stability, but about control of trafficking routes. According to indictments unsealed years later, cocaine allegedly moved through military-controlled airports, remote jungle airstrips, coastal launch points guarded by naval units. Flights allegedly departed Venezuela for Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico, where drugs were handed off to Mexican cartels before crossing into the United States. The accusations were explosive, but Maduro remained untouchable. In 2017, the United States imposed its first major sanctions on Maduro's government, citing human rights abuses and the erosion of democratic institutions. Maduro responded by tightening his grip, rewriting electoral rules, and sidelining opposition-controlled institutions. That same year, multiple Venezuelan officials were indicted or sanctioned individually by the U.S. Treasury for alleged drug trafficking and money laundering. Still, Maduro himself was not named. That changed in March 2020. On March 26, 2020, the U.S. Department of Justice unsealed indictments accusing Nicolás Maduro and several top officials of narco-terrorism, conspiracy to traffic cocaine, and corruption. The language was unprecedented. Prosecutors alleged that Maduro had coordinated with Colombian guerrilla groups, used cocaine trafficking as a geopolitical weapon, benefited financially from the drug trade while Venezuela collapsed. The U.S. government announced a $15 million reward for information leading to his arrest. For the first time, a sitting president of a sovereign nation was publicly labeled by Washington as a drug trafficker. The world braced for war. Comparisons were immediate. In 1989, the U.S. had invaded Panama and captured Manuel Noriega, a former CIA asset turned alleged drug lord. Would Venezuela be next? U.S. warships moved through the Caribbean. Military exercises intensified. Rhetoric escalated. Then, in May 2020, something extraordinary happened. In the pre-dawn darkness of May 3rd, a small group of armed men attempted to land on Venezuela's northern coast by speedboat. They claimed they were there to capture Maduro. The operation was later called Operation Gideon. The incursion failed almost immediately. Venezuelan forces intercepted the group. Some attackers were killed. Others were arrested on camera. 2 Americans, former U.S. Special Forces soldiers, were paraded on state television. Maduro mocked the attempt, calling it a comic invasion. Venezuelan intelligence appeared to have advanced knowledge. The alleged invasion that was supposed to topple a government collapsed in hours. There would be no U.S. Marines, no aerial bombardment, no dramatic capture. Maduro survived. From 2021 onward, the standoff froze into something more ambiguous. The U.S. maintained sanctions. Maduro consolidated power. International allies, including Russia, China, Iran, and Cuba, deepened ties with Caracas. The indictments remain active. The reward remains posted. But Maduro has never been arrested, extradited, or tried. Supporters say the accusations are fabrications designed to justify regime change. Critics argue that the lack of arrest does not mean innocence, but geopolitical reality. Arresting a sitting president protected by the military and foreign allies would risk regional conflict. And so the story continues without a final act. Today, Nicolás Maduro still governs Venezuela. He gives speeches. He oversees elections. He commands loyalty from generals whose insignias still shine in the sun. To the United States, he is an accused narco-terrorist. To his allies, he is a defiant symbol of resistance. To millions of Venezuelans, he is the face of a system that has failed them. There is no courtroom verdict, no prison cell, only sealed indictments, intelligence files, and unanswered questions. And perhaps that is what makes this story truly unsettling. Because somewhere between truth and power, between allegation and silence, stands a president accused of running a drug empire, still free. Here's a true, current situation narrative you can add at the end of your long narration, reflecting the latest verified reporting about the Maduro-USA confrontation in 2026. I've kept it fact-based and chronological. Current situation, as of early January 2026. In the weeks leading up to January 2026, tensions between the United States and Venezuela reached a level unseen in decades. Since 2025, the U.S. government under President Donald Trump had dramatically escalated its campaign against Venezuelan drug trafficking networks and the government in Caracas, accusing President Nicolás Maduro and his inner circle of running the so-called Cartel de los Soles, a drug trafficking network allegedly connected to senior Venezuelan officials. The United States had designated both the Cartel de los Soles and other Venezuelan criminal groups as foreign terrorist organizations and increased its bounty on Maduro's capture to tens of millions of dollars. American officials had also taken an aggressive military posture. Beginning in mid-2025, the U.S. authorized strikes on vessels in Caribbean waters it claimed were moving cocaine toward the United States, launching attacks that killed more than 100 people and marking one of the most forceful U.S. military campaigns in the region in decades. In late December 2025, the Trump administration reported strikes on a drug-loading facility in Venezuela, stating the attacks were meant to disrupt narcotics shipments. There was no official confirmation from Venezuelan authorities about the precise targets or the results. Amid this immense pressure, Maduro publicly expressed willingness to negotiate directly with the United States on drug trafficking issues, a major shift from years of mutual hostility, while still rejecting U.S. military actions and insisting Caracas sought dialogue rather than conflict. Then, in the early hours of January 3, 2026, the situation exploded into outright military confrontation. President Trump announced that U.S. forces had conducted large-scale strikes on Venezuelan military and other strategic sites, and claimed that in the course of the operation, Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores, had been captured and flown out of the country. The U.S. said they would face charges in the United States, including those tied to drug trafficking and narco-terrorism. Venezuelan officials, however, denounced the action as an illegal act of military aggression and imperialist attack on Venezuelan sovereignty, declaring a state of emergency and mobilizing citizens and loyal forces in response. Explosions were reported in Caracas and surrounding states, and aerial activity was seen over the capital, causing widespread alarm among the civilian population. Reports indicated damage to infrastructure and intermittent power outages, while both governments traded accusations on international platforms. The United States justified its actions as part of a broader campaign to stop the flow of illicit drugs into its territory and to dismantle trafficking networks it says are entrenched within Venezuela's political and military leadership. Critics, including several Latin American governments and legal experts, have raised concerns about the legality of the strikes and the implications for regional stability. As this new phase unfolds, the world is watching. Is this the end of Maduro's controversial era, or the beginning of a broader conflict with consequences that could reshape geopolitics across the Americas? This is not just a story about drugs or politics. It is a story about how power protects itself. So ask yourself, if these allegations are true, how many governments are hiding similar secrets? And if they are false, how dangerous is a world where accusations alone can define history? If you've heard this story before, or if this is your first time, subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. And we'll see you in the next story.